All right, we're going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 10 this morning, as Daniel read verses 5 through 20 for you. I want to remind you that we're just going verse by verse through Ecclesiastes. Thank you. We have come to a passage in chapter 10 that is basically explaining to us the great harm that foolishness brings into our lives. Now, as I go through this, I tell you, just as I did last week, naturally, you and I are all fools. That's who we are. In and of ourselves, by nature, we are foolish. We must learn wisdom. We must learn prudence, and we have to put on the wisdom of God by seeking it through the Lord Jesus Christ and learning of Him and applying it to our lives. But I said to you last week and the week before that we need to define wisdom and foolishness. And so I told you that a good definition for wisdom is understanding, having a deep knowledge of God and His ways, understanding and having a deep knowledge of the realities of life under God, the way that it is. And then the more you learn about the way the world is, who God is, what God is doing, and you take that knowledge and you apply it to your life in every area so that you make your judgments and you use discretion based on what honors God, what's pleasing to God, based on God's ways and how He does things and trusting Him through what He's doing. That, my friends, is wisdom according to the Bible. If that is wisdom, then foolishness is the exact opposite of that. It is a lack of knowledge of God and His ways and the realities of life. And instead of having a knowledge that you can apply to everything and make discretion or use discretion to make decisions, instead of having that, you lack it. And so what do you make your decisions on? How you decide how you respond to things in life. You use it based on your emotions, right? How many of us, many times in life, are controlled by our emotions and not the way that God would direct us to respond? How many of us make decisions in our life based on our emotions and not based on the knowledge of God and understanding what honors God? So you see the difference in the two? You can live life just basically on however you feel and whatever you decide, and those are the paths that you follow, and my friends, that will be foolishness. Or you can pursue wisdom by seeking to know God, to understand His ways, by seeking to have a deep understanding of the realities of life. And then you respond to everything in life out of that knowledge. And as you do that, you apply wisdom to your life. And as we've been studying Ecclesiastes, wisdom has great benefits. Great benefits. But wisdom is also limited in that, as wise as you can be, it cannot guarantee that you are not going to be affected by the curse of this world, right? However, it is far better to be wise, even though it can't guarantee that you're not going to suffer, you're not going to have losses in your life. Wisdom can't stop, as Solomon called it, time and chance. Wisdom can't stop death always, but it can prolong life. Foolishness can also shorten life. But the point is, we are being commanded by Solomon, if you will, to pursue wisdom so that as you live life under this sun, it will be the best life that you can live. And then when life under this sun is over, then you will stand before God having used wisdom, and God will then reward you for the wisdom that you used, for seeking to honor Him, for seeking to want to live in a way that lines up with His ways and what you understood about Him. And so this is what we're learning. So in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, we've come to the section where he puts a lot of focus on foolishness and the harm that it does. And so very quickly, start in verse 1 with me, because the first point we spoke of last week is that foolishness will spoil a lifetime of wisdom. He says in verse 1, "Dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor." You remember I asked you last week, how many flies does it take to ruin your glass of lemonade? Only one. And the whole lemonade is ruined, right? So in the same way, it only takes just a little bit of foolishness in your life to ruin years of wisdom, to ruin many, many months of good decisions. And now all of a sudden, just a little bit of foolishness brings such great harm because it spoils the whole jar of perfume. Now the good news is that does not mean that using wisdom can't also help you recover, that using wisdom can't also restore many things in life. But make no mistake about it, there's a great harm because just a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. And I hate that that's the way it is in this world. But in the cursed world we live in, that is the way that it is. And we looked at examples that I'm not going to go through again. You can look up last week's messages if you'd like to know more about that. Verse 2, very quickly. "A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left." And we're not talking politics here. Get politics out of your head. We're talking literally the right way and the wrong way in life. And so whenever we look at this, we understand that the problem with foolishness and wisdom is that it begins in the heart. If the heart is not right, if you're not feeding the heart the right things, if you are not seeking the ways of God, and you're not instilling in your heart, as the psalmist said, "Your word I have hidden in my heart that I" what? "That I might not sin against you." If you are not nurturing your heart and feeding it with the things, if you spend the majority of your week just focused on the things of the world, living your life, working, trying to make sure you have a roof over your head, if you're not feeding, if all you're doing is watching TV and listening to radio, that all it does is feed the flesh man, make no mistake about it, that heart is going to be inclined to go the wrong way. But if you are nurturing your heart, that heart is going to be inclined. You know what an incline is? That's right. It moves you in a specific direction. And so if you want a heart that moves you in that direction, that inclines you, it leans you that way, then you need to make sure that you're caring for your heart, you're guarding your heart, you're nurturing your heart, you're feeding your heart what it needs. Verse 3. "Even when a fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he's a fool." And that simply says that foolishness will expose itself. Your foolishness is going to come out, and everybody's going to see it. Don't think for one second that you're hiding anything. One day, it's going to come to the surface because you can't walk down the road as a fool and everybody not see it. And so it exposes itself. Verse 4, it says here, "If the anger of a ruler rises against you, do not leave your place." In other words, don't respond on emotion. There's a way for you to respond that you can actually get something accomplished. But if you come in guns blazing, what are you going to get according to last week? A Mexican standoff? And who wins in a Mexican standoff? Everybody dies. And so there is a way for you to respond in wisdom so that you actually have a chance of accomplishing things that are going to be for your good and everyone's good around you. And he says, if the anger of your boss or your ruler rises against you, or the authority around you rises against you, husbands, if your ruler, if your wives rises against you, and her anger gets rough, there is a way for you to respond so that you can lay great offenses to rest. But again, marriages, y'all listen to me, if you come out guns blazing and you start throwing missiles, all you're going to do is destroy one another. And so he says here that foolishness makes a bad situation worse. But wisdom responds in a way that can actually make a bad situation good. It can make it better. And we, if we're going to be wise, will learn this, or we can be fools. And how many people's relationships in here with friends, family, whatever, have ever been destroyed because of foolishness? Foolishness brings great harm. Now we get to today, verse 5. Foolishness puts the wrong people in authority. Look at what he says next in verse 5. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. So here we got a ruler. Maybe he's a good king. Maybe he's a good governor. But he makes an error. And let's see what this error is. In verse 6, it says, folly is set in many high places. We got the good old boy system. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? We got the good old boy system. Basically, so-and-so is my buddy and my best friend, and so I want to make sure they've got a good position. I'm not trying to set people in authority that actually deserve the position, that actually belong there. Instead, I'm looking at any other thing other than qualification. And so you got rulers that they lead in that direction. And make no mistake about it, when you put the wrong person in authority, the whole country or the whole church or the whole thing is going to go in a bad direction. Look what he says next in verse 7. He gives the example. He says here, the result of foolish leadership is that it moves the culture into foolish patterns. Look at the pattern. I have seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. Now listen, this sounds like, in theory, a great thing. Because we all hear the phrase all the time, everybody is equal. And now listen, if we're all made in the image of God, which we are equal in value. We are equal as far as how we deserve to be treated. But does equal mean same? No, it doesn't. God has created a system in this world to where some are wise, some are foolish. Some have means, some have no means. Some people have gifts and abilities that other people do not have. Some people were created for these roles and these responsibilities while others were not. Is God wrong for designing His world that way? No. And so when we as leaders step in and try to say, well, you know what? Everybody ought to be on the same ground. Now listen, that sounds great. It sounds great. Yes, let's let men and women compete together in sports. And as I heard a comedian say one time, if LeBron James decides today that he wants to be a woman and he goes to the WNBA where he scores 800 points a night, is that right? Is that what it means to be equal? And the point is this, God has made us different for a purpose and a reason. And so in theory, it sounds great, but it's foolish not to recognize and believe that everyone, even though they may be equal, they are not the same in their gifts, in their abilities, in their strengths, in their weaknesses, in their roles. And each person has a place and has things that they have been designed for the glory of God in some way or another, but equal does not require us to be the same. And so again, when we put people in authority, this is important because this is the culture we live in today. The culture we live in today, many of our leaders have stood and said, everybody is the same. And that's just not true. That's not wisdom. That's foolishness. Now listen, there have been some positive developments as far as this train of thought. And what I mean by that is you've got equal legal rights regardless of race or sex. So it's a good thing that women and minorities have the same voting privileges as anybody else in the world. Those things are good things that have come out of this, but that's not what we're talking about. It's good that we have educational opportunities today that many times women and minorities didn't have. Those are good things to understand that we're all equal in the eyes of God, that we have the same value, we have the same worth. That's great. We have access today to many professions that women are qualified for, that many times in years past were not even eligible to be considered for things like that. And so I'm not talking and saying that there isn't some good in this school of thought, but you know as well as I do that we can take it way too far. Case in point, women's sports. Case in point, locker rooms, bathrooms. Men and women do not belong using the same toilets, unless you're in the same home, of course. But we are different for a reason, and this is not a bad thing. Military standards. I'm going to say this. I got nothing wrong with women in the military. I applaud anybody that is able to volunteer and they're willing to give their lives for the good of their fellow man. I applaud you. But church, please hear me out on this and understand this. The day us as men send our women and children to the front lines to die for us, the day we quit being men. I'm thankful for women in the military, but listen, if something goes bump in the middle of the night at my house and I reach over and go, baby, get up. Go see what that is. So I don't do that. Something is bad wrong. Can we all agree on that? So yes, we are equal, but equal does not mean the same. God designed me with gifts and abilities, with purpose and reason, and God designed my wife with gifts and abilities for purpose and reason. Unfortunately, this mindset today has also created a culture for us that it is very difficult. If a woman were to choose that she wants to stay at home and raise her children, it's hard on the family. Does that mean that we shouldn't make those sacrifices? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that unfortunately, because of this mindset, we have created a culture that in many cases, if you want to live a life that you can provide good things for your family and for your children, which all of us want to do, right? Unfortunately, it's hard unless God blesses you with a high enough pay that you're able to support that. Many times it takes two in the marriage out working full-time jobs to be able to provide and to be able to help have certain things in life. And again, I'm not talking about the wisdom of what choices you ought to make in that. I'm just saying that that is where this mindset has brought us to. Do y'all understand that? And so we don't have a place anymore to where we can say that yes, that we ought to live in a culture to where men ought to be able to go out and be providers, and if women want to, they're the helpmates. They can work or they can stay home. They can whatever is best for the family. God created the man for this purpose, and God created the woman for this purpose. And if your liberal women's rights mentality can't get behind that, it's foolish. Not according to me. According to the Word of God. And so we need to get back to a place where we understand that, listen, we are equal in worth, in value in the eyes of God, but equal does not mean the same. And so a small fly in this ruler's perfume, all he did was appoint a leader. Solomon said it's an error that I see that proceeded from the ruler. He set someone in authority that thought it was a good idea for everyone to be equal. Solomon said, I've seen slaves on horses. I've seen princes walking on the ground like slaves. In other words, somebody thought it was a good idea to just make everybody equal. Well, I'm sorry. But there are some people that God has created with wisdom and ability, and they make good leaders, and they make good people that should be in those positions. And there are others that God created to serve. And there is nothing wrong with either one. They are equal, but make no mistake about it. Foolishness will cause great harm because one fly in the leadership all of a sudden takes the entire culture in a direction that it seems like it's almost impossible to come back from. Anybody? This is the truth. And so foolishness puts the wrong leaders in place. And unfortunately, you'll read through Proverbs or you'll read through Isaiah. Isaiah prophesied and told us there's going to come a time to where good men that ought to be leading won't stand up and lead. And then who takes the place? Foolishness ends up sitting in the seat. And I feel like that's where we've got many times today. Today, it seems like, and I'm not trying to get on politics. I'm talking about what the Bible is talking about, okay? But it seems like it's so hard for us today to find a name on the ballot that we can look at and say, that's a wise person. That's someone that would be good in this position. And that's somebody that won't make foolish decisions, or we hope will not make many foolish decisions. Because we're all fools. We're all sinners in some regard. But some people should be in places of authority and others shouldn't. And if you put the wrong one in there, it's a fly in the perfume that spoils the entire culture. And I really believe this is what Solomon is trying to get across right here. The next thing, if you were to keep going with me in verse 8, he says, foolishness will backfire. Foolishness will backfire on you. And we'll look at what he says here. Go with me first in verse 8. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he has to use more strength, but wisdom will help one to succeed. What is he saying in this section? He wants you to understand that there are going to be repercussions for your foolishness. And so in this right here, he talks about mischievous things, and then he talks about normal, everyday activity. And he's basically saying that there are many dangers in this life that many times you may not be able to avoid. But if you will use wisdom and not be foolish, you will have the best chance at succeeding in everything that you do. And so he uses examples like he who digs a pit. If he's not careful, he ends up falling into his own pit. Now, I believe he's speaking of an evil person that's trying to be mischievous, that's trying to catch somebody else in a trap. He's somebody that's being foolish because instead of using calmness, instead of trying to actually figure out how we can make peace, he is trying to set a trap for somebody to harm them. Why do I say that? Look at Psalm chapter 7, verse 14 through 16. Behold, the wicked man conceives evil and is pregnant with mischief, and gives birth to lies. Well, let's see how they understood this to play out. Verse 15. He makes a pit, digging it out, and falls into the hole that he has made. You see what he's saying? So they understood in this day and time it would be a very common practice if you were trying to hurt somebody, or you were trying to be mischievous, or you had an evil heart that inclines you to go the left. He understood that this is a person that usually ends up trying to dig a pit so that he can catch somebody else in it, trap somebody else, hurt somebody else, but yet in his mischievous ways and in his evil in his heart, it actually backfires on him and he ends up falling into his own pit. Whereas if he had have used wisdom and his heart had have been inclined to the right, he wouldn't have acted on his emotion. And it may even be talking about the ruler here. The ruler has made him mad. The ruler, because of the error that he has made, it has really caused a man that normally maybe would be wise and good to make a terrible decision. And he digs a pit, and all of a sudden, not only did he not necessarily harm or affect or change anything What did he do? He fell into his own pit. He harmed himself. And this is what we see here. Mischievous ways will backfire on you. Evil ways will backfire you. I believe that another verse in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, where he says, and the serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. I believe this also is a mischievous person, an evil person that's doing something that he shouldn't be doing. For instance, if you were going, I didn't give Jack this one. Jack, can you find Amos chapter 5, verse 19? Amos chapter 5, verse 19. I want you to see what this says. As if a man fled from a lion, and a bear met him. Boy, that's a rough day, ain't it? You're running from a lion. I mean, you can't do nothing but look back, but you don't even see there's a bear right in front of you. That's a bad day. But he says, or he went into the house and he leaned his hand against the wall and a serpent bit him. One of the things that we see in this culture is that many times they made houses out of blocks or some kind of material that a snake could get in there. And so it actually was not uncommon for a snake to be living in your walls. So here we have a situation where I believe he's talking about somebody that is trying to break down a wall, is what Ecclesiastes said. He's trying to break down a wall, and he's doing it out of a mischievous heart or an evil heart. Maybe he's even trying to break into the house because there's something in there that he wants. I don't know. We don't know the context. But we know that when he was doing this, it backfired on him, and there was a snake in the wall that actually bit him. And what you need to understand is when you're using foolishness and you're not using wisdom to make good decisions, whether you're digging a pit to trap somebody or whether you're breaking down a wall that you shouldn't be trying to break down, the problem is that foolishness is going to backfire on you, and eventually you're going to get bit. You're going to get bit. And so foolishness will backfire. And then if verses 8 and 9 are talking to us about things that we're doing mischievous, he moves into ordinary work in verse 9. He says here, he who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. In other words, we live in a fallen world, and many times, even using wisdom, or even if you're not being foolish, maybe you're just doing your job. Sometimes if you're working around heavy stones and you're quarrying stones and you're breaking marble off, sometimes you may get hurt by the stones. Sometimes if you're out splitting wood and you're out here and you're working trying to keep your house warm and you're doing normal everyday work, sometimes you cannot stop the backfiring or the damage that is done because of the curse of this world. Sometimes you can't stop that. But I love the way that he ends it in the next verse, in verse 10. If the iron is blunt, one does not sharpen the edge, he has to use more strength, but wisdom helps one to succeed. In other words, if you use wisdom, then you don't have to worry about falling into your own pit because you don't dig it to begin with. If you use wisdom, you don't have to worry about the snake biting you in the wall because you ain't trying to break it down. If you use wisdom, you may be thinking ahead about that heavy rock. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've watched the guys that I work with in the field, and they should have had shoring on the walls and a deep ditch that they were in. But they just think to themselves, I'm just going to jump down there for just a minute. I'm going to do something real quick, and I'm going to get right back out. How many people do you think have probably died because all of a sudden the walls caved in and buried them alive? And if they had to use just a little wisdom, they could have saved themselves the trouble of the backfire that foolishness brought on them. And this is exactly what Solomon and the Word of God is trying to get across to us. He says, if you will do just a little bit of preparation, just a little bit of forethought before you do and make whatever decision you need to make, then it's going to go better for you, and you have a better chance of succeeding in everything that you do. Let me give you an example. If Chris Pope burns wood, if he's going out there to load up a load of wood, and he's fixing to start cutting trees down, it would probably be a good idea for Chris to stop for just a minute and say, okay, do I have gas and oil? Check. Is my chain sharp? Because if my chain is not sharp, an extra 15 minutes, 20 minutes for me to take and stop for just a minute and sharpen this chain is probably going to save me a whole lot of strength, a whole lot of work. In other words, we're talking about patience. But how many people in here are more like me and less like Chris Pope? Now what I do is I usually I'm running from one thing to the next, and I'm going, okay, I've got this amount of time to get this done. And so I run over here and I grab that chainsaw, and I don't even worry if the gas is old or not, or if it's even bar oil. If it's just used motor oil, that'll be good enough. And I grab it all up and I jump in the truck and I take off, and then I get to where the wood is and I start cutting it, and all of a sudden my saw won't even go through the wood. And I'm sitting there for 20 minutes just pressing as hard as I can trying to make it go through. So, come on, some of y'all fools in here. Y'all know what I'm talking about, don't you? So many times I mess things up and it ends up backfiring on me, and I don't get anything accomplished because I did not stop long enough to use just a little wisdom. And this is the trait that Solomon is trying to teach us. Slow down, be patient, spend 10 minutes sharpening your blade before you go to cut trees. The saw will cut faster, you'll use less energy, there's a less chance of kickback on the saw that might get you hurt. The work will be much safer, and you will actually succeed in what you were trying to accomplish. Or a mechanic. Anybody in here ever, where's Philip Hewitt at? Philip, you ever used the wrong tool? You said, all right, I know that I need a socket for this, but all I've got is this 14 millimeter wrench, and so I'm going to put this open-end wrench on it, or I'm going to put this crescent wrench on it. I ain't got time to go get no penetrating oil to loosen this thing up, but instead, I'm going to get this wrench on it, and I'm just going to try to manhandle this thing, and then you strip the bolt, and then what you got to do? Now I got to spend the next hour drilling this thing out. I mean, this applies in so many different areas. If you're an accountant, I talked to my wife about this, and you're trying to reconcile accounts before the year end, and accountant, if she'll spend or he spends just a little bit of time each month reconciling bank statements, reviewing any transactions that's coming through, then when the audit actually comes around, everything is organized and you can give an answer for everything. But the foolish person puts it off until the end of the year, and then she spends every night chasing missing receipts, or she's trying to make sure that she can explain any kind of discrepancy. There are all kinds of issues that foolishness will cause you. It will backfire on you. Or if you're driving. How many of you came into church on two wheels this morning? Leave just a little bit earlier. Drive just a little bit slower. And how many of you know you're going to be on time and you're less likely to end up in an accident before you get there? And what did it take? Just a little bit of wisdom. Just a little bit of wisdom. And then I say to a marriage today, instead of waiting until resentment and bitterness builds up to the point that it seems like you can't turn it around, a husband and a wife that uses wisdom and learns how to communicate, and they learn how to apologize quickly, and they learn how to address small problems before they become big problems. A marriage that uses wisdom usually won't end up in a place of bitterness and a point of no return. Come on, somebody. Just a little wisdom. Just a little wisdom. The spiritual life. A Christian that spends time in God's Word and in prayer, when temptation or suffering comes, he already has the spiritual strength he needs to overcome it. What did he do? He used just a little wisdom so that he thought ahead and he prepared. So here's your application for that. Here's the principle that Solomon is teaching. Wisdom is not always some spectacular thing. Wisdom many times is in the little bitty decisions and the forethought that you take. For instance, before you make a decision, before you do something, just ask the question, what could go wrong? What could happen? Not so you can worry, so you can be prepared. You can ask, how can I prepare for what could go wrong? Or you could ask, is there a better way for me to do this? Can a few minutes of my planning actually save me hours of frustration and actually help me to succeed? This is a very simple concept. And I know a lot of you may be thinking this morning, man, I didn't come to church this morning for a TED Talk. Can I tell you, I'm not giving you a TED Talk. This is the Word of God. If God put it in His Word, do you not think that He wants you to apply it to your life? Do you think God gets any pleasure out of seeing you struggle and cuss that piece of wood that you can't get your saw to go through? Not at all. God instead would have you to learn wisdom, and He would have you to make wise decisions in life. He would have you to try your best to succeed in life. And then, yes, time and chance happens to everybody. Yes, there are things that you can't stop in this world. But wisdom is still far better, and it gives you the best chance at succeeding. All right. I'm out of time. Imagine that. That never happens, does it? Number 3, verses 12 through 14. I'll go through these quickly. Foolishness will consume you. This is important. He says, the word of the wise man's mouth wins him favor. Another version says, it gives grace to the hearer. It's gracious, the words of a wise man's mouth. But notice the contrast. But the lips of a fool, what does it do? It consumes him. Now this is kind of a play on words here, because the mouth is actually meant to consume other things. And instead with the fool, his mouth consumes him. And this is what we get in this whenever we look at the way that we talk. This is a situation where we see that a fool's words always get him into trouble. A fool speaks without thinking. He don't think ahead and think, what's going to happen when I say this? How's this going to affect my relationships when I say this? The fool just opens up his mouth and stupid falls out. I mean, just whoop, there it went. And he destroys relationships around him. He says things that offend. He says things that provoke others. He says things that expose his ignorance. Come on, somebody in here that's been a fool before. A fool's lips will consume him. And God would have you not be a fool. God would have you learn wisdom, learn prudence. And so He wants you to have words that speak grace, not words that do harm to others, not words that corrupt when you talk. He would have you to have a gracious mouth. And that, my friends, takes wisdom. The next thing in verse 13 through 14, he keeps talking when he should be quiet. Verse 13, the beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness. So it just starts out. You ever talk to somebody, and I mean, they don't get started good before you going, what are you talking about? They don't even get started good. And then notice that. The end of his talk is just absolute madness. By the time he gets done, you're going, you're a few fries short of a Happy Meal, ain't you? Just a few. And this is the fool. He keeps on talking when he ought to just keep his mouth shut and be quiet. And so he's bringing harm to himself. He's consuming himself. And so whenever there are many words in us, transgression is not lacking. Proverbs 10 verse 19 says. His speech destroys relationships. He's a gossiper. He's a slanderer. He has criticism for everything and everybody. He boasts. He lies. He has angry words that damage his friendships. And again, all of us are naturally, in many ways, we do this. We have to learn wisdom and learn prudence. But the Word of God here would spare you from that. And He would say, if you want the best chance of succeeding, then don't let your lips consume you. Instead, watch what you say. think before you speak. Ask yourself the question, what good is this going to bring when I open my mouth? Or is stupid going to fall out? And my friends, if you come naturally to just open your mouth and stupid falls out, you need to learn to practice just keeping your mouth shut for a while until you learn how to be gracious with your lips. Until you learn how to speak in a way that actually builds relationships. Come on, somebody. This is where we have to get to. Foolishness will consume you. It'll bring God's judgment against you. Jesus said that on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word that they speak. Matthew chapter 12, verse 36. On the day of judgment, you are going to give an account for every careless word that you speak. Man, that ought to make some of us shake in our boots. I don't want to be a fool. I don't want to be a fool. I want to be wise. And in order to do that, I have to learn God's ways. I have to learn to make decisions and use discretion based on what would honor God, based on what God would desire, based on what's going to benefit those around me and give grace to the hearer. Those are the decisions I have to make if I don't want to be a fool. So listen, you got an employee that constantly complains. If I'm talking to some of y'all in here, you're always fussing about your job. You come in on Monday and you ask somebody, hey, how you doing? How you feel this morning? It's Monday. Here we are again. You criticize your bosses. You're always talking about somebody. You're always talking about the people that you work with. You eventually lose the respect of your co-workers and possibly even your job. Why? Foolishness. Let's just call it what it is, all right? Foolishness. Or a husband that's speaking harshly and sarcastically to his wife or his kids or maybe both, and he does it for years, and eventually the relationship is so deeply wounded. What happened? His own words consumed him, or her own words consumed him. It goes both ways. Your words will consume you. Or you always, come on, I'm going to get somebody on this one. You always posting on social media. You a member of Hip Pulaski, and all you want to do is fuss about everything and call everybody out. I got to put somebody on blast, as they say. I'm going to tell you something about me. I don't see that but a couple of times before I look at that and go, that's a fool. That's a fool. That's somebody that the beginning of their talk is foolishness, and by the time they're to the end of it, they're just crazy. And all they're doing is stirring up trouble and stirring up harm, and you ain't brought no grace to nobody that hears any words you've spoke. And listen, I'm telling you that as your pastor this morning. Please don't let me see you on these things, putting somebody on blast. Now, I'm not saying there's not a place for us to be able to speak about things that need to be corrected and things of wisdom. I understand that. But you ought to have a heart to always want to seek peace, to always want to try to restore, to always want to try to lovingly correct. That's not usually our mindset. Our mindset is usually, I'm going to let you know how I feel right now. And that is not wisdom. That is foolishness. All right? Are y'all tracking with me? A fool's words will consume them. And so you need to keep that in mind. Foolishness will bring on poverty, verses 16 through 19. He goes back to the ruler here, talking about foolish rulers who are lazy and foolish rulers who are self-serving, not wise rulers who are looking for the good of their people. He says in verse 16, woe to you, O land, when your king is a child. In other words, we've put somebody in the place that they're not qualified for, right? He's still on this same flow. He's still on this same train of thought. He says, woe to you, O land, when you've put a leader in place that is not qualified for the position. Woe to you. when your king is a child. And not only that, but the princes and the people that are under him, they're feasting in the morning. What does that mean? They're self-serving. They're just getting drunk in the mornings. They're using their position for their own desires. Woe to you! And then verse 17. But happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of the nobility. In other words, he actually qualifies and he deserves to be in this place. Notice what he does. Your princes feast when? The proper time. They do it not for self-service, but what do they do it for? For strength. And they don't do it for drunkenness. Why? Because they're using wisdom. And he says it's a blessed land when you have this, and it's a cursed land when you have the other. And y'all know this. You know this. And then verse 18. I don't have time to get into that one. Y'all have to pick through that one. Verse 18. Through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks. In other words, foolishness is going to bring on poverty, both in the kingdom and even in your homes. Why? Because foolishness will come out in laziness, in idleness, and everything around you is going to fall apart because you're too lazy to get up and do something. You let the roof leak for years and years, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and it costs you $20,000, $30,000 to get the roof fixed, and you sitting over here crying going, what happened? You're too lazy to get up and fix something that started out as just a drip. And foolishness is going to bring on your poverty. And then he goes on in verse 19. Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life. In other words, nothing wrong with feasting. Nothing wrong with feasting if it's at the proper time. Bread is a good thing. Listen, we Baptists, we know how to get together and celebrate over some bread, don't we? Feasting is a good thing. It ain't no coincidence that everywhere Jesus went, He was usually going to a party somewhere. He'd go to a Pharisee and he'd say, hey, today we're going to your house. Get a meal ready. Or he'd end up at this place. Hey, today I'm coming to your house. Get a meal ready. Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life. Wine ain't bad in and of itself. It's bad because we have sinful hearts. And the Bible says wine brings out what's in the heart. But God made wine as a celebratory drink. And He says here, wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. Some of y'all said, I just found a scripture I can live by. That's not what He's saying. Y'all remember in previous chapters He told us very plainly that money don't answer everything. But what He's getting at here is this. If you want to fix the roof, if you want to make sure things ain't falling down around you, if you want to make sure you can feast and have bread for laughter, and you want to have wine for gladness, you better not be lazy, because if you're lazy, you ain't going to have no money, and if you don't have no money, you can't fix the roof. And if you don't have no money, you can't buy no bread. And if you don't have no money, you can't buy no wine. But if you're not lazy, and you're actually out there and you'll put in a good day's work for a good day's pay, it answers everything that you need in this life. And then verse 20, because a lot of this comes from a good or a bad ruler. Don't we blame our economy on the top? I see it today. Oh, when Obama was in, we had this economy. And when Trump was in, we got this economy. And when Ronald Reagan was in, we had this economy. Be careful how you blame everything on your ruler. There are many reasons for that, but the number one reason is even the foolish ruler God allowed to be there. So if you want to speak against your foolish ruler, you better be careful, because you're not just speaking against your foolish ruler, you're speaking against God. Because God is the one that put him there. You say, oh, I don't believe that. Go back and ask Daniel who put Nebuchadnezzar, this evil king, over him. God did. God always has a purpose. God's always working something out. Our job is to trust Him. But He says here, be careful that even in your thoughts, in other words, it don't matter if it comes out or not, even in your thoughts, don't curse the king. Don't do it in your bedroom. Don't curse the rich, for a bird of the air will carry your voice, and some winged creature may tell them out. Y'all ever said to somebody, where'd you hear that? A little birdie told me. There's little birdies everywhere. And you better watch what you say, and you better watch what you think, because you will be held accountable for it. Wisdom watches their mouth, watches their thoughts. Wisdom prepares ahead of time, and wisdom makes sure that you have the best chance of succeeding in life. In closing, this is the applications for you. Number one, you're not here to ask, do I know any fools? If you're looking around right now going, yeah, they're foolish, and they're foolish, and they're foolish, you are the fool. Instead, you need to be asking yourself the question right now, God, where is there foolishness in my heart that needs to be dealt with? Where do I let my lips consume me? Where do I not take a little forethought and prepare ahead of time? Where am I not thinking through things? Where am I not seeking You for wisdom so that I can apply this to my life? You need to be asking, where is foolishness still hiding in my heart? The second thing, guard your heart. It all starts there. Guard your heart. If you want to incline to the right, you better be feeding your heart the right things. The third thing, slow down before you speak. Quit opening your mouth and letting stupid fall out. Just shut up. Yeah, that's right. Your pastor just said shut up. But that's wisdom for some of us. Just shut up. Just close your mouth until you can develop a mouth that can speak graciousness like a wise man should. Slow down before you speak. Ask yourself these questions. Will these words honor Christ? Come on, spouses, husbands, and wives. Before we say anything, would it help us just a little bit if we said, God, is what I'm fixing to say going to honor You? God, is the way I'm fixing to respond to this going to honor You? Because if not, your words are going to consume you, and your marriage will be destroyed, not because of God, but because of who? You, the fool. Slow down. Ask yourself these questions. Are these words going to be gracious? Are these words going to be healing? Are these words going to help? Third, practice wisdom in the ordinary things. Practice wisdom in the ordinary things. Sharpen the axe. Prepare before the job. Think before acting. Address problems while they're still small. Use wisdom. And then lastly, honor the authorities that God has placed over you. You may not agree with every decision they make. I don't. I don't agree with a lot of things that even our current leadership does. I do not agree with a lot of things. But I will honor Him. I will honor our leadership. Why? For the same reason Daniel to Nebuchadnezzar would say, O King, live forever. The same reason Joseph would help Pharaoh in a foreign land have a successful, so that everybody in the world came to that nation for the salvation they needed. Joseph honored that. Why? Because he knew that God was doing something. Even if I don't agree with it, this world's not my home. What God does with this world makes no difference to me. My job is to live for Him, and my job is to honor Him. And as I honor Him, I'll honor the authority. And so in my thoughts, I won't curse the King. In my speech, I won't curse the King. I will honor Him with the words of my lips, and I will make sure that I am spreading words of graciousness with my lips. Where is foolishness in your heart? Where do you need to apply this in your life today? Don't walk out of here today without putting this into practice. If you do, you're a fool. Figure out, where can I put this into practice and apply it beginning today?